had a heart attack signing that lease because it was this business park where basically new businesses went to die for the most part.
From self-described skateboard punk kid to CEO of a multi-8-figure business. In this episode, we're going to unpack all of it. Today, we're speaking with Matt Prados, founder and CEO of ReviewWave, a software platform that is transforming how chiropractors and optometrists run their practices. You've gone from a 7-person startup to a 106-person team, and I gotta know, what is the biggest lesson you've learned scaling a team that fun?
There's so many lessons. I mean, in the early days...
What did you mean when you said entrepreneurs are broken?
We're not sane. If you knew the pain and suffering that you were signing up for, you're gonna get rejected by so many people. You're gonna lose sleep from, am I gonna make payroll? Am I not? Like, who in their right mind signs up for this?
Would you do it again if you knew what was on the label?
You know what?
Any recollection of that first moment where you were like, I need to evolve because what got me here isn't going to get me any further?
I've paid, over $500,000 in the last decade to be in rooms and talk to different people and really learn. And over the last couple of years, I've gotten to the point where I'm becoming one of the bigger companies in most of the rooms that I go in. So it was like, how do I find that next level? We were raised on 16-hour days and figure it the fuck out. But brute force will only get you so far, right? And then you have to figure out how do you get.
Hey guys, Johnny Page here, and I'd love to give you a free copy of our latest book, Software as a Science. This book teaches 9 core frameworks that we have honed over our work with 3,000 founders. It tells the story of 60 different SaaS companies and really focuses on the science behind growing software companies. So if you're tired of spraying and praying all of these growth strategies, some of them working, some of them not, and ultimately not feeling like there's predictable growth in your SaaS business, then go to softwarebook.com, get a free copy of the book. All we ask you to do is pay for shipping. And after you get your copy of the book, you'll get access to a reader's portal where we have tons of resources. Our goal in this book is not that we fill your head with head knowledge, but that we actually make it tangible impact on your business. So there's a ton of resources to help you actually implement what we teach. So go to softwarebook.com for your free copy today.
So look, you've gone from a 7-person startup to a 106-person team. And I gotta know, what is the biggest lesson you've learned scaling a team that far?
Oh man, there's so many lessons. I mean, in the early days, hiring the right people that can see the vision is kind of that stage, that first 25, and then as you grow, you're looking more from generalist to specific people, and then as you get even bigger, you got like even more experience as you become a grown-up company, if you will, a little bit more sophisticated. So, through all of it, the absolute biggest piece is, do they subscribe to our core values, right? Because no matter how good they are at whatever their craft is, whether it's accounting or marketing or sales, if they don't fit our core values, then it's not going to work long term. So core values is absolutely the first and foremost lesson in building your team, and then you can get the rest of it from there.
Yeah, you said something interesting that I want to touch on for the people listening, especially said in the early days, is really important to make sure that they can see the vision. And I think said differently, it's a CEO's job to be able to sell the vision.
Sell the vision,
right?
Yeah.
So like, how do you do that, especially in those early days?
Yeah, so we were in a garage / flex space. We had a literal door that could open up and a semi could back in. Like it was
like a loading dock kind of thing, huh?
Almost. And so anyway, it was this business park where basically, new businesses went to die for the most part. Cheap, and I almost died. I had a heart attack signing that lease because it was like $2,700 a month, and I had to personally guarantee it.
Yeah.
So anyway, people, it was hard to find the place, right? So that was a big part of hiring, is could you even find the front door? But then once they walked in, you don't look at a garage space with no real furniture, some makeshift desks, a beanbag, and 2 people in 2,500 square feet, and think to myself, this seems like a great place to work, right? So you gotta be a little special. To a large degree, most of the people that come in at that stage are, somewhat like entrepreneurs, and we're broken, right? Like we're like starting over our life, and we don't really know what we're doing, and so we see some ad and we kind of go in there, and the vision has to include like that person growing and getting better. My very first hire 8 years ago was this young kid who, kind of fresh out of college, had a couple bad jobs, got suckered in some sort of scam, I think, and like lost some money on some, MLM deal or something. He walks in this not matching hand-me-down thrift store suit, and he's all scruffy, and he's got these beat-up shoes on that I think has some duct tape on them, and like, I'm only offering $15 an hour, and he's the only guy that showed up to the group interview, so he got hired, you know. But then as we continue to build, you know, we definitely had some people come and go and learn some culture, some core value lessons. I mean, I didn't start the company and go, hey, these are our 5 core values. And, you know, out the gate, they evolved over time, obviously. Sure. But yeah, these people that came in early, I didn't even honestly know to sell the vision. I was just moving fast, right? And so as we, you know, had people who had been with us for a while, and then they started to talk about how, you know, how they saw things, I realized that even though I wasn't trying to sell the vision, I was talking about the future, and they were buying in, right? One of my guys who's been with me now for almost 7 years, you know, his mom, who is a very successful, you know, businesswoman in her own right, asked him, like, are you going to stay with this little company that's out of a garage? And he said, yeah, I think they're going somewhere. And this was like a year in. Yeah. And so he saw the vision, and I mean, he's done extremely well, and, you know, grown up, you know, at the company, moved from, you know, bought a house and sold a house in California, bought a house in Texas, you know, got married, had a family. Like, all of his dreams are coming true with the growth of the company and his growth in it. So, you know, he saw enough vision for him and the company to hitch his ride. And I think that's the quality of people that you get early that stick are those people.
Yeah, dude, you said a couple interesting things I want to click on, but the first one is that you said you didn't really sell the vision on purpose. You were just moving fast. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs will overthink this concept of selling the vision, right? And they're going to be like, how do I put my turtleneck on and be Steve Jobs at the keynote? And I don't know. I kind of feel like just through your actions, like your authentic self trying to make something out of nothing, enrolls more people in the vision. Like, is that representative of how you approached it?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely just 100% authentic. We had no HR. I had no time to, you know, do reviews or one-on-ones or any, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah. You know, and I think people got a good grasp of what was going to happen because I did group interviews. And I would have, you know, 10 or 15 people, you know, on a couch, you know, and rapid firing questions. And I remember one time, you know, some person tried to walk in 10 minutes late to the interview, and I was like, get out. Yeah, I couldn't get out. And they all were like, oh, like he means business, right? And I think they all learned that very early, is just like, we don't have time for people. You can't show up on time, that you're not a core value fit, right? You're not a culture fit. And so, yeah, it was rough, and, you know, there was no trainual, there were no SOPs. There was just me and a couple of other rugrats in a garage with, you know, each our own little dream. And there was definitely a lot of yelling and, you know, a lot of long hours. And one of my buddies jokes, he's one of the OGs, and he says, you know, we were raised on 16-hour days and figure it the fuck out.
Yeah, man.
that was how he felt raised. So
yeah, I mean, dude, that's a very common, and honestly, like, that's what you should expect if you work for a 7-person startup out of a garage, man.
100%.
Any other way is probably too slow.
Yep.
Do you still do group interviews?
We don't do group interviews anymore. Group interviews to me is like it's a coping mechanism to, you know, get through. We didn't have time to do 10, 15 interviews, right? So it's one interview, and maybe we'll hire you, right? And so I would highly suggest them in the beginning. I think they're very, very good. But no, especially, I mean, it depends on your stage, right? At a 100-person company, I would say no. But then again, when you get back to being a 1,000-person company, maybe they come back as a thing that makes sense. Yeah. But we currently don't.
Cool. What did you mean when you said entrepreneurs are broken? You said that real fast and moved on. Like, what's beneath the surface there?
We're not sane. It's like, why? If you knew the pain and suffering that you were signing up for some random guy to go on Glassdoor and talk about you've got barely average IQ and, like, you know, you're, you know, Darth Vader, or you're a horrible individual, and like all the things that you're gonna get mocked and all this stuff, right? You're gonna get rejected by so many people. You're gonna lose sleep from, am I gonna make payroll? Am I not? Like, who in their right mind signs up for this, right? Like, we're kind of weirdos in certain ways, and everybody's broken in different ways. I mean, for me, I had a boss that just, I was like, I hate you. I doubled your company. You gave me a 10% raise, and you literally mock me every day. Like, what are you doing? Right? I'm like, I can't do this anymore. So I'm going to go out on my own. And so for me, it was like, mentally abused by this dude, who I learned a lot from. And, as I look back, I go, okay, well, I had an example of what not to do, how not to treat people. So, I mean, I'm grateful for that. And I wouldn't be here today without the time spent with, we'll call him Bob, and so I'm grateful for Bob. But at the end of the day, definitely was broken and unemployable. So if you're unemployable, you gotta be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's a potato, right? One or the other. Would you do it again if you knew what was on the label?
You got to be a special kind of crazy for that, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't regret it a single day. And I look today and I'm extremely grateful to be, at the level that we've built it to. I mean, there were many days early on where it's like, I'm not like necessarily a super religious guy, but I mean, I got out of bed and got on my hands and knees and I did some praying, help. I don't know where dinner's coming tomorrow. Yeah. Like, give me the strength to make it through. Right. So, there was a lot to unpack there, but, I believe that life happens for you, not to you. Yeah. And I needed this journey to become who I've become, because the money, the cars, the planes, the watches, none of that stuff matters more than who I've become on the journey. So
can you, I'd love to unpack that a little bit. Like, who did you need to become to go from a guy who was trying to figure out where dinner was coming from to someone whose business is doing tens of millions of dollars in revenue?
There are so many levels to that onion, that's for sure. I mean, the guy who didn't know where things were coming from was scrappy and had the grit to, keep stepping forward, right? And that is 100% required trait for early entrepreneurs. But along the way, I've had to, learn how to communicate differently with different people. I do swear a lot less these days. I wouldn't say it's completely gone, but in the early days, there's just a percentage of brute force that's required to make it. But brute force will only get you so far, right? And then you have to figure out how do you get other people to do the work versus you just doing all the work. So the phases are, almost uncountable if you really look at all the micro phases. Yeah. But, at the end of the day, I think, one of the big things and thing I'm working on these days is really giving myself grace to be happy with where I am versus, the manic where I want to be, right? Because I think with most successful people, they feel like they're not doing enough and they should do more, whereas like most unsuccessful people think they're doing too much, right? So
you have any recollection of that first moment where you were like, damn, I need to evolve in my business because what got me here isn't going to get me any further?
Yeah, I actually spent a weekend in Park City with this guy who helped us kind of go through our core values and describe our core values. And we were sitting there and, one of our core values at the time was give a fuck, right? And that's like, it's still part of my core DNA in the way I think. Yeah. But to put that on a website forward facing for mass, distribution to all kinds of different clients of all different types, walks of life, as well as all different, employees was maybe a little harsh, right? So that we had to, change that to handle it. So I think that weekend in Park City, there was tremendous growth, personally and working through and really understand the core values and how that would affect other people.
Yeah. So on the topic of values, one of the things that you and I chatted a bit before we started recording is that you put a lot of emphasis with your team on the fact that they need to be perpetual students. I think that anyone listening to this would be like, oh yeah, Matt, that sounds great. I want my people to learn stuff too. But how do you actually make sure in real life that your team is learning every day?
So we've done all kinds of things over the years from, so we have libraries in our offices with books that we specifically want them to listen to. We have an Audible account with books that we specifically want them to listen to. But I think, the big thing is leading by example, right? And at our town halls, I talk about books that I've read. I talk about lessons that I've learned from those books. And, we now have 2 annual trainings, but we started out about 5 years ago with an end of year annual training. And I started bringing in, famous speakers. So our first year, we had John Assaraf from The Secret come in. He was local to us in San Diego, and actually his son works for us. Oh, cool! And so we had an inside connection to get in there, and that was during COVID, so nobody wanted to travel. So John did us a solid and came down, and I'll tell you another story about that in a minute after I finish this. But we've gone on. We've had Tim Grover come in. I had Ryan Stewman talk, Ryan Holiday, a number of just people that I believe in their messages, and I want our team to evolve. And so that, I think, has been a big part, training and focusing our team. And then, I am very vocal and share with them, the health journeys that I work on and the things that I work to lose weight. So we've had a tremendous amount of our team get way more physically fit, and, it's not mandatory or anything. It's not like a modeling gig or something where there's a contract that you have to have a 6-pack or something like that. But I try to show people that there's a better way. One of our guys had never eaten a vegetable in his life, and every lunch I saw him bringing in drive-through, and I was like, this has got to stop. And so I actually went out and did some research, and we started ordering pre-made meals from Icon Meals. And so they were getting protein, they were getting carbs, they were getting healthy food. That's and cool. Started teaching them how to, eat right, and we paid for it all. So, long story short, a lot of it's lead by example, and, just having that story. But one of our core values is win. And I've really aligned winning with getting better, 1% better every day, right? And you can't get better if you're not hitting all those pieces. Yeah.
So leading by example. What are you learning right now?
Right now, I'm doing a lot of podcasts. I am in the middle of reading Atomic Habits. I've actually never read that book, even though it's, such a great book. It's been recommended a ton of times. So I'm reading that, doing, one-on-one coaching with Dan Martell, which is going amazing. Lots of podcasts, certainly, enjoy Dan's podcast. I like, Hermosi is, one of the best teachers of our generation for sure, breaking stuff down and making it easy to understand. Those I would say are kind of my top of mind big things that I'm learning right now, in addition to just continue to work through the discipline I need to continue to up level my physical fitness, which is a mental tour.
No doubt. Dude, let's double click on the Dan factor for a minute, right? So, obviously most people listening to this podcast know Dan Martell. You've been your SaaS Academy alumni, your Boardroom alumni, so you came all the way through our SaaS focused programs, and now you're working with Dan privately. What are 2 or 3 things that Dan Martell's influenced you in life?
I've paid, over $500,000 in the last decade to be in rooms and talk to different people and really learn. And, over the last couple of years, I've gotten to the point where, I'm becoming one of the bigger companies in most of the rooms that I go in. So it was like, how do I find that next level? And Dan's got such a great, extensive experience in businesses of all different sizes, obviously with the software twist. So it was just the obvious choice to kind of go to that next level. And obviously with his own evolution, he's just been on a tear this last year with his physical fitness transformation, his book, and all the things that he's doing. So it was absolutely perfect timing for me to connect, to see, have that energy in my life. And working with Dan, he's probably one of less than 5 influencers on the internet today that's not full of shit, right? Trustworthy, and really has the stats to back up what he's talking about, right? So working with Dan's been absolutely amazing. Highly recommend it to anybody in that top tier of business that feels that need for that inner circle member to really know their shit.
Yeah, that's cool. Last thing on these core values, man, because I know how important it is. You've done a ton of hiring. How do you know when you're interviewing someone that they're going to live up to your core values?
That's a great question. I mean, at the end of the day, so many people today are full of shit, and they interview really, really well, right? And so you really have to look for like the most minute details, right? So if you're hiring a more entry-level individual, like you're not going to be necessarily going out to dinner with their spouse and interviewing them at the same time and doing different things. At my level, where I am interviewing, C-suite level people, like I do want to meet the spouse. I do want to see what's going on. I do want to understand their life. And so you can understand a lot about, person, obviously, by kind of looking at their life and how they do things. So there's no magic bullet to how to do it, except for, ask really good questions and pay attention to the details of the answer.
Yeah. What's your, when you say really good questions, what's your favorite interview question?
It depends on the position, because we're at the size today where it's very much, specialist, right? So if I'm talking to a marketing person or a salesperson, what's the last book you've read on sales or marketing, right? And if you tell me like the 4-hour work week, like you are definitely not getting hired. Like that has been a minute, bro. Right? Yeah. Catch up with us, right? Yeah. Who's your favorite, influence in that area? If it's a more generalist role, what's your last book? What's your favorite movie? What are your hobbies? Just trying to like dig into, kind of behind the curtain where, somewhat the question is not expected, because the expected questions have been worked through, and the proper the right answer is being given versus the correct the true answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool, man. I love it.
This episode of the SaaS Academy podcast is sponsored by SaaS Academy. And rather than me sitting here and telling you how great we are, which I'll tell you, I do believe we are. I used to be a client of SaaS Academy and it changed my life forever. But I want to share with you a few of the testimonials of founders just like you who have been through our programs and seen some incredible results.
Let's switch gears and talk about the company.
Okay.
Right? We've talked about the man, we'll talk about the company. You started out solving one problem, right? You're solving reviews for chiropractors.
Yep.
And over the years, now you managed all the patient engagement, a lot more features, a lot more wide-ranging software. Like, walk me through how you go from the initial problem you solved to now doing everything you do. Like, there's got to be a right way to do this. How did you do it?
Yeah, so we had no thought of creating anything more than a review generation platform, hence the name Review Wave. Made a lot of sense. Ended up being the worst name I think I've ever come up with, after a year or two when we started to diversify. But I was actually here in Chicago, walking down the street with another extremely successful entrepreneur, multimillionaire, who flew in on his private jet from New York to meet me in Chicago, where his company was based. And we were having dinner, walking down the street to get to dinner. He looks at me and he says, "Matt, what are you going to do when reviews no longer matter?" And then he looks away and starts talking to his buddy. And like, I didn't have time to answer it, think about it, nothing. And that question that, got under my skin is like, he's right. Like we're a one-trick pony. And if reviews ever went away, which they're not going to, but if they did, we'd be in trouble. And if all we did was reviews today, we'd be in trouble, because other people have come out and started doing reviews in our space, right? So they do other things, they added reviews. So, in the beginning, it was talk to clients. What are you missing? What do you need? And they're like, hey, we're paying you for reviews. We're paying this guy for texting. We're paying this, company for our electronic health records, which is like a CRM for healthcare. Yeah. And so, my view was like, if I'm going to add a feature, I don't want to just copy somebody else's mediocre feature. Like, what's wrong with it? What do we need to make better? And so we were actually the first company in our space to come out with business texting. So getting the text message rights to the office number, which was a complete game changer, because patients were not used to the random number that they couldn't call back. Yeah. They didn't like the short codes. So the no-show rate was still decently high. And so when we came in and we started using the actual number, they recognized it, they knew it, they could text back and forth, we greatly decreased the no-show rate. So, amazing texting, and deliverability was always huge for us. So that's a big part. And then we just continued to dig, what problems are you having? We added online scheduling next, and I have background in digital marketing, so conversion optimization. So we really designed it in a very special way that isn't like dorked out, developers make this weird portal that's off on some other site that you have to register for before you can schedule, and all these, things. So it's figuring out what is that need? I mean, they're not going to tell you, hey, we need online scheduling, but we figured it out and then we did it. So it's knowing your industry for sure, knowing your person and being able to read between the lines on what's going to solve the problem that they're talking about. Because what they're saying, I need more new patients, we could do marketing for them, but that's not what we do. We do software. So what part of that new patient funnel can we fix? Well, we fixed scheduling.
Got it. How did you end up in chiropractors?
So I actually come from the largest family of chiropractors in the world.
Got it.
Over 80
business,
chiropractors in our family. Wow. My parents were both chiropractors. I worked in their office, as a teenager and through high school. I just couldn't sit still. So after 6 weeks of college, I walked out.
So that was that.
That was that. No being a chiropractor.
Yeah, got it. That's interesting, man. You got any stories about like how ReviewWave has really changed a chiropractic business?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we healthcare, chiropractors, dentists, optometrists, these are small businesses for the most part. These are family-owned businesses that are, a lot of times husband and wife, and they have, one or two staff. They don't have big HR teams. They don't have recruiting teams. So like hiring staff, retaining staff is hard. Yeah. And so what ReviewWave really did was create a business in a box where if you turned it on and your receptionist no longer had to call every patient to make sure they were going to come in that day because the text message went out. And then if the patient did miss for some reason, we could do automated follow-up to text them like, hey, you missed your appointment. Let's get you rescheduled, right? Yeah. And so we brought an enterprise franchise-like level technology of systems and implemented it in small businesses, which allowed them to stably, retain the patients they had while adding more new patients, and so they would grow. And that's a game changer. I mean, we have probably over 100 testimonials on the website at this point, just of all the offices we've affected that we've been able to shoot video with. But we've helped over 5,000 chiropractors build their practice, U.S. and Canada. And, we're definitely not slowing down.
Yeah. So reading it back for a sec, it's family business. You got 80 chiropractors in your business. You're talking to them. You're figuring out what features to install.
No, the family part really wasn't a big part, except for my experience in my parents' office. I actually didn't know most of the 80 chiropractors in my family. I mean, my mom was second generation chiropractor, and so but I never knew her dad and that kind of stuff.
So they weren't like your first customers or anything?
No, not at all. I don't know that we've ever signed up a family member. Most of them are retired at this point.
Yeah.
And so. I worked with chiropractors. I worked for my parents. Then when I moved to California, from New York, I didn't have a college degree. And I mean, what kind of job are you going to get? Well, sales and marketing, right?
Yeah.
So I did work with chiropractors there, and ended up working at a chiropractic consulting firm and really learned the business of chiropractic. So I could literally, at that firm, I consulted hundreds and hundreds of chiropractors, after learning the business model and the frameworks. And so I really knew the problems they were having at that point.
Yeah. Do you find it hard now that you got 106 team members to stay that close to your customer?
Yeah. I mean, the bigger you get, the harder it is to be closer to your team as well as your customers. Yeah. And so, certainly in the early days, I had, when we had 25 staff, I had all the staff over to my house for barbecues, right? Yeah. Like, that's just part of the game at that point. And once you get to 50, you really can't, unless you have a really big ranch somewhere, you're not having a barbecue with everybody, right? So it gets awkward and challenging to keep those connections. And then with clients, it's something you got to focus on and stay on top of your industry and see what they're going through and see what you can do.
That's cool. So like starting out doing sales and marketing, and then you had an agency for a bit, and then started the software company. Like, who were your early influences in business?
Yeah, so as we talked about, we're definitely not, normal people per se.
We're not two Stanford CS graduates sitting in these chairs, man.
Definitely not. So, back when I started looking at building a digital agency, you had the internet marketing phase of Frank Kern was young and putting out courses, mass control and things like that for like $2,000. And so, I did a lot of that stuff. Ryan Dice did a lot of those programs, but I think think if I were to look back and say the two biggest early business influencers in my life would be Frank Kern and Dan Kennedy. Frank had this interesting way of looking at life where, kind of throw all the Kiyosaki stuff out and all that stuff. And it was just like, what do you want in your life? How much does that cost? Where do you want to live? What kind of car you want to drive? All these things. Not buy it cash, but like, what's your monthly payment going to be? Yeah. All right, well, let's call it 10 grand. Okay, well, how do you make 10 grand a month? Right? And it was just so simple. It was like, I mean, he was this degenerate surfer, pothead, personality back then. And I'm like, I like that. Let's be a degenerate surfer making $10,000 a month with a private chef and things like he was talking about. So that was kind of how I looked at life. And how do I get reoccurring revenue? And that was a big part to get to the agency and eventually the software model with the subscription based. And then Dan Kennedy, I think is one of the most brilliant business minds of my lifetime. Also underrated because he really, he was pre-internet in a large degree because he was at such a tail end of his career when the internet really started to kind of ramp up. But I did a private day with Dan, and I mean, one of the, it was a great day. Very enjoyed that. But he showed me so many different ways to look at things and gave me a lot of stable data. I'm like, you can scale a lot of things, but hold on to the bank account. Like, don't give anybody else control of the bank account, right? And I mean, I certainly could have let some people that would have screwed me take control of the bank account in the early days. So that was a solid piece of advice. And I mean, to this day, the bank account is still very heavily monitored, right? So yeah, those two are two of my absolute favorites from the early days.
Yeah, dude, marketing's a funny thing. It's like marketing changes really rapidly, but the strategies of influence rarely ever change.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so many of the guys that are like popular teachers of the last decade, they all came from Dan Kennedy. Yeah. I mean, Frank Kern came from Dan Kennedy to a large degree.
Yeah, it's funny, before that, even, like Ogilvy on advertising, for instance, right? It's the classics, man. That's cool. And so Review Wave was bootstrapped for a very long time, right? The 7 guy in the garage story. Yep. And then when you crossed about 18 million in revenue, you ended up raising some venture debt, right? Yep. What went into your decision to raise money?
So something happens. Stripe has an API for VCs or something. The minute you hit like $100,000 a month in MRR, you start getting all these emails, right? So, I mean, we had been flirted with for a long time on money, and we got close a couple times, but I had this gut feeling that this isn't right. This isn't quite what I want. And so we continued to stay bootstrapped. I had gotten to profitability pretty early on. I had stayed lean. And then I was making good money taking distributions and different things. Yeah. And, I decided, okay, I was at a big mastermind event, and I sat down with this guy who had sold his company for $1 billion. And he's like, so tell me what's going on with your business. And so I'm like, all cocky. I'm telling him all this great stuff that we're doing. And he kind of chuckles. And then he sits back, and I finish talking, and I'm looking at him like, what are you laughing at, right? Like, what's that about? He goes, when are you going to get serious about building your business? And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I was like, why are you taking so much money off? Like, put it back in, bet on yourself, and grow that thing for real. It's like, that was brutal. Yeah. So I was like, all right, you know what? Let's look at that. Let's stop taking distributions. Let's put it all back into the business, see how fast we can grow. What does that look like? And, so we pivoted in from a S corp to a C corp and stopped taking distributions and started running a 0%, deal. And, we did that for, 2023. We did an all stock acquisition in early 2023. And so, life was good. But then the VC world changed from growth at all costs to like, you got to be slow and EBITDA. Yeah. So I was like, oh, well, let's flip that. Because I always like to do, let's at least try what everybody else is saying not to do right now, right? So I said, all right, I'm still not going to focus on EBITDA. Let's figure out, let's have some extra money to make some bets, and let's see what happens, right? And, so Q4 last year, we were looking at a Series A, and, we got real close with a firm that I actually liked a lot. They were just a little bit too conservative, but then it got down to the wire. It's like, why am I taking this money? Like, what's it going to do? Yeah. How's it going to change my life and my lifestyle, my energy? And it's hard to be a CEO of a company that's mostly in a different state, right? In an in-office company, mostly in a different state. So I travel out there and I'm away from my family 8-9 times a year for a week or so, right? And so I was like, if I'm truly going to be able to do this for a very long time, I need to change a few things. One is American Airlines, you suck. I need to stop flying on your airplanes, right? So I was like, okay, so I need to start, getting a private jet. I can fly out there. Life be a lot easier. And so I said to the guys that we were about to do the Series A, I was like, hey, I just want to make sure you're cool that how I'm going to spend the money. Because some of it's going to go to a jet. Yeah. And they were like, no. And I was like, well, we're going to end this conversation then. And so one of the guys who I really liked, and we've become friends, and I've actually brought him on as an advisor. Cool. He pulls me aside and he says, look, you want money, but you don't want governance. And I was like, yes, that's what I want. He's like, yeah, you don't want to do a Series A, you want to do venture debt. And I was like, what's that? Because I had no idea what that is. My Stanford degree around here somewhere. Nobody told me about it, right? So I learned about it. I was like, that sounds amazing. Yes. And then all of a sudden, he introduced me to a couple of firms. I went through it. And it's not cheap money by any stretch. However, if you look at it versus like a Series A, if you're really going to grow your company, the stock that you give up for the price right now is a lot more expensive than grow your company. So highly recommend entrepreneurs that have scale and can afford to make the interest payments on the debt, to look at debt versus that, because it's a great option. But we did it, and it allowed me to make some bets, and a lot of the bets failed, which is, they were bets, right? So I learned from that, and we burned a few million, and that really taught me that I don't like a company that burns. I don't like it at all. So peeled that back to, okay, get back in the black, be cash flow positive, right? It's all part of the journey. Like what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. And so we've still got a war chest that we can use, and we're certainly deploying some in different ways. But the biggest part is just making sure that I can sustainably do it, because if I were not part of the company, it would be in big trouble. Sure,
that makes sense. What's next on the list of bets for Review Wave? What are you pointing towards?
Big bets. So AI is obviously huge. So so I bought a company called Practice Pal. We have Review Wave, and we are days away from releasing in the wild an AI receptionist.
Oh wow, that's pretty cool.
One of the biggest problems in SMB healthcare is they have trouble finding people to answer the phones. Chiropractors specifically have weird schedules, don't work Tuesdays, half a day Thursdays, every other Saturday, right? When do patients call? They call when they want to call, right? So we can deploy this after-hours receptionist to answer the calls, have real conversations, and because we're already reading the data in the EHR, we can actually schedule them and write it in. So instead of having a weird call center with somebody who's really unhappy to be working nights and weekends, they can have a voice that's nice, pleasant to speak to, and all that. And it's been amazing to listen to these calls. And people are like, oh, old people won't like that. I mean, we were listening to calls. I'm like, this lady's 80 and she just scheduled her own appointment with AI without a question, right? And so very exciting to see that going, and actually that pivot where we're, Review Wave as a patient engagement is really going all in on AI, a reception, and how to run a practice on AI. So we're actually combining all of our products into a new brand, and we will now be called Aloha.
Oh, that's cool, man. Congrats. That's awesome. Dude, you said something that's, I think, really interesting that I don't want people to sleep on. If you're listening to this, I need you to capture what Matt just said here, right? It was, you had these, or your team had some preconceived notions that AI won't work in this scenario. And this has nothing to do with AI. It's this bet won't work in this scenario because I don't think this customer would do it. And your approach was not to battle that with another opinion. It was to say, let's try it. Let's go listen to some calls. Let's get the data behind it. Bezos calls it being a truth seeker, right? And it seems like it's pretty reflective. Is that how you normally approach things?
100%. I mean, coming from the digital marketing world, you do split tests, you do different things. So yeah, we like to test things. We like to see what's going on. But there's also the litmus test of if everybody sees your vision, you got the wrong vision, right?
That's big.
So, I definitely enjoy pushback from my team, pushback from our clients. That doesn't sound like it's going to work, but it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
And so obviously, we got to go prove it out and make it work. But the advancements in AI in the last 12 months have been ridiculous.
Yeah.
And what they're expected in even just the next 2 months that I'm hearing about are like more than the last 12 months, right? So it's interesting. I mean, there's certainly like the skeptical, like we're moving into an iRobot world and like this is scary and things like that. And then there's, you got to hire companies that use humans, and yeah, you got to do that. But there's definitely scenarios where it makes sense to deploy technology and be able to empower people to do the most human jobs, right? And like if you're a receptionist, you want to receive and greet and help the people in front of you, right? Whereas like the phone, AI can do just as good of a job, especially, nights and weekends when you're sent into an answer machine or a call center, or, a poor staff member who has to carry a cell phone on and be basically on call on nights and weekends. I mean, that's not fun. Nobody likes that.
Yeah. And dude, it's interesting what you said about how it feels scary with AI. If you think back historically, like cars were scary as hell when people were riding horses. Planes were scary when we were only driving, right? The internet was scary. Email was like, why wouldn't you just send a letter? Like none of this stuff made sense. Right. And I think that's probably a signal that, if you're not paying attention, and sure, it's going to be screwed up 1,000 ways before it's great, but like, man, it's a real thing.
It's definitely a real thing. It's exciting. And I mean, I've heard it all from like, hey, AI is now building AI, which builds another AI. And by the third generation of AI, that AI, all they want to do is kill the original AI. So like, you hear the conspiracies and like how it could go wrong. And obviously art imitating life with iRobot and Eagle Eye and those movies, right? But I think hopefully we can be good and control it well and use it to empower lives.
Yeah. So I'd love to just double click on the industry for a minute, right? I mean, we talked about the impact of AI, which is interesting, but maybe at a bigger level, like what's broken about the way that patients and healthcare practitioners relate with one another that you're trying to fix?
I mean, communication. So first of all, these doctors are great people, but they go to school to be doctors, right? They don't go to school to run businesses and be entrepreneurs most of the time. Some of them get extra business degrees and whatnot, but then there's coaches that maybe train them on systems and things like that. And so, they're trained to be great doctors. So what they should do, just like as entrepreneurs, we look at what are we good at? Yeah. We need to do that, and we need to pass the other things, right? And so, using technology, empowering their teams, especially, with high turnover, and lacking of training and various things, technology can really help healthcare providers give higher quality care by spending more time on the patient versus the administrative work.
So it's like solving a zone of genius problem more than anything else.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Cool. I want to talk about your future for a minute. So one of the things that I know before we started recording, you had mentioned you've got some interest in launching a fund.
Yeah.
Why?
One day I will eventually sell the company, right? And anybody who knows me, laughs at the idea of retirement, right? Like, nobody.
People like us
don't
sit still, right?
Yeah, like, I got to be solving problems. Yeah. And so I, having gone through my journey, I mean, I can sit down with pretty much anybody who is a founder of a software company, in the 0 to 20 range, and I can dissect what's going on, right? And so if I could help, 5 or 10 of these individuals a year by, investing in their company in angel or Series A kind of rounds, that would be exciting for me, right? Because I could coach them to, to do great and to grow, and, most people never make it to 20 million, right? And so to be able to take a majority of these individuals that might typically would never make it past 5 or 10 and help them get to 15 or 20 would be a lot of fun. It'd be satisfying, and I definitely would get my fix of solving problems and seeing issues and being able to provide that help. I mean, after a certain amount of money, we enjoy helping more than anything else, but money at the same time is kind of a scorecard. The money's an idea backed by confidence, and the more people have confidence in you, the more money typically ends up coming at you.
Yeah, that's cool, man. It's a strong vision for the future. It's pretty neat. I'd love to wrap up with a couple rapid fire questions. I always do this with our guests just to have some fun. What's the biggest daily habit that you think's been crucial for your own success?
Working out, without doubt.
Hands down, instant response.
Yep.
Yeah.
No matter what's happening, work out.
And you've had a journey on that, yeah?
Yeah. It's been on and off for years. I mean, I had CrossFit training for 5 years. Did a massive Go Ruck 1 year. Did hot yoga for a while after that. But, I found weightlifting. Nobody ever taught me how to weightlift as a kid. I didn't have a gym, didn't have a dad who liked to lift weights or anything like that. And so I ended up, bumping into a coach who put me on a fitness program that had a bodybuilder type regimen to it. And for the first time, I started to be like, whoa, there's a little bit of line there next to that bicep there, right? Yeah. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. And so it gets easier when you see results. But yeah, no, the last 2 years specifically have been big years. I mean, September 2nd of last year, I started 75 Hard and actually completed it. Right? It was my third time starting. That was a big deal. Yeah. And I stayed pretty good on it. But yeah, working out every day has become just that lifestyle point that can't live without.
Dude, I love it. Next one is your bootstrapping phase, your fundraising phase, or your venture debt phase rather. Which one was more challenging for you?
I don't really look at either of them as challenging. I had actually had a huge financial explosion of 2008 or 9, whatever that real estate bubble was, right? So lost the house. I had an apartments invested. So I basically ended up with $250,000 in debt, and that was brutal. And I had to figure out, how do I get out of that? And so I eventually negotiated and paid off the debts and learned how to live on a cash basis. So bootstrapping a company after that, where you learn to not take anybody's money and just pay cash, was pretty straightforward, right? And it was certainly stressful the first year. Once we hit profitability, it was like smooth sailing, right? Venture debt, also not really stressful because, again, I did it so I didn't have governance, right? Venture debt is like, they'll give you the money, they trust you enough that your company's big enough that worst case scenario, they're in first position. They're going to get their money.
They'll get it on the assets, or they'll get it on the
They'll get it somewhere, right? So they're safe on their bet. I mean, we have a quarterly call. It's like, hey, what's up? How you doing? What'd you do this weekend? It's very easy going. So, I certainly didn't enjoy burning, a couple $1 million this year. So I wouldn't say that was fun, but I'm awkwardly, I don't stress on almost anything. It's just it's a point of being there's a phase of being an entrepreneur where it's like that emotion doesn't do you any good. Right? So you got to let it go. Dude,
it's so funny. So I was talking with Dan about this literally an hour ago, where there's just a threshold in your life where you can make the choice to stop caring about certain things. Or you've conquered the emotion. You'd be like, that used to just terrorize me, and now I'm just gonna set it down. Don't worry about it.
That's right.
Yeah, that's cool, man. All right, last one. When the day is done, the page is turned. Matt Prados is no longer on this planet. What's that one thing you want to be remembered for?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. Dan and I also had a conversation about this idea of legacy, these different things, there's not a this must be on my gravestone kind of thing anymore. I do a weird exercise. I do write my own eulogy occasionally. Powerful. My wife was pissed when she was going through my notes. She was like,
worried about this?
You, huh? She was pissed. That did not go over well. But for me, it was a great exercise. It's just, it's really not about being remembered for it. But at the end of the day, if I sit back and I go, hey, this is the last day, am I proud of myself for what I did on this rock with the time that I had? And if I can say yes, then that'll be good.
That's cool, man. I love it. All right, a lot of good lessons from this one, man. Dude, I appreciate you sharing an hour with us. It was awesome.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks, man.
Go.
This podcast is brought to you by SaaS Academy, the coaching program for B2B SaaS founders who want to scale their businesses while creating more freedom in their lives. You can visit saasacademy.com if you want to learn more. I'm Johnny Page, and your host for this episode was my good friend and buddy, Matt Verlaque. A special thank you to our guest, Matt Prados, for sharing his expertise and his story with us. This episode was produced by Nicole Beaulieu, Cooper Bernath, Devin Holmes, and Chandler Jenkins. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, can you do me a favor? Take a moment to subscribe and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback means the world to us, and honestly, it helps us reach more founders just like you. With that said, we'll see you next time on the SaaS Academy podcast.